Hi, everyone. This is Code Talk, one of our monthly series hosted by CODE-CWA, where workers and organizers in the tech industry study and explore the historical, economic, and political context in which we struggle. Tonight, we are hosting a question and answer session with Raghav, Kaushik, and Harsha Pilli, Microsoft workers and caste and tech activists. We'll be talking about the important intersections between labor organizing and ethics in the tech industry. This will be a two-part Q&A. The first will be moderated between Tedwood, myself, Raghav, and Harsha. The second part will be open to the audience. We'll be taking your questions. For those who are repeated to the event, please check your emails. There's a link to join the call through which there you can submit your questions. And feel free to send in multiple questions at any point in the event, including in the chat. All right, let's get to it. So my name is Wes McEnany, campaign lead with CODE-CWA. My pronouns are he, him. Tedwood, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Tedwood Strong. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a labor organizer for CODE-CWA, and I'm based out of Atlanta.
Thanks, Tedwood. Harsha, can you introduce yourself?
You're muted, Harsha.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I was muted. Harsha Pilli. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I work for Microsoft in customer success team.
Thanks. And Raghav, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Raghav. I'm also on Microsoft in the engineering team, and I work out of Redmond.
Great. So I think to begin, we're going to start with Raghav and Harsha giving us sort of an overview of what we mean when we're talking about organizing around caste in tech in the United States.
Cool. Thanks, Wes. Let me begin by sharing a PowerPoint that Harsha and I made. I will use that to kind of guide our presentation. Are you able to see it?
Yep.
Okay. So we're here to talk about caste. Now, it comes from the South Asian background that Harsha and I share. And so that's, and you know, before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge Equality Labs, both for the slide deck that I'm doing and for helping work with CODE-CWA to arrange this event. All right, so what is this caste thing all about, right? So let's start with the fact that, you know, we have a South Asian background. So we have people in America who have origins from South Asia. And these are not just talking about literally the countries in South Asia, but also people from South Asia have in the past migrated to, like, for example, countries in the Caribbean, right? And then these people end up migrating to America. So people who have a South Asian origin can go ultimately to South Asia through all of these ways, right? So that's what we broadly mean by South Asian Americans. One of the things that you need to understand with South Asian Americans is wherever we go, we take caste with us, right? So what is this thing called caste? So what is caste at its core? It's basically a social category that's determined at birth, right? What all does that social category do for you? It assigns you a hereditary profession, caste-based profession. It pretty much determines everything you do in your life, the amount of resources you have, where you live, the kind of schools you go to, the kind of water you have access to, who you marry, everything pretty much, right? And it has, it's not just interpersonal, but it has institutional implications as well at the workplace, which is what is of interest to all of us. An important thing to understand about caste is it's hierarchical, right? This difference of occupation and who you marry and so on is not just a kind of equal peer kind of relationship. There is an explicit hierarchy in there. And this is laid out in the scriptures, right? On the top, you have this 4 basic castes, which are further refined into subcastes and so on. But basically, you have at the top what are called the Brahmins, who have like access to the best resources, who generally tend to be priests, and in the ancient era, in the modern era, they tend to be well educated and occupy jobs which require good high skills and so on. And then you have the so-called Kshatriyas, who are historically the warriors. And then you have Vaishyas, who are historically the merchants, and still in the present day, many merchants do tend to be from this caste. And then at the bottom, you have Shudras, who tend to be roughly peasants, right? And out of this system, and there are people who are so-called outcasts. That's the Dalit, and we have also Adivasis. So Dalits are people who are outside of the system, who historically do like really menial work, like manual scavenging and so on, and they're they're like among the most oppressed. And then you have the Adivasis, who are the indigenous people of India, who are also pretty oppressed. They're commonly referred to as high and low caste, but in this presentation, I'm going to use the word caste oppressed for the so-called higher caste, and the caste oppressors for the so-called higher caste, and caste oppressed for people who are lower in the hierarchy. I guess with that, I wanted to turn to Harsha to explain his own personal experience with caste discrimination before we go ahead with the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Raghav. So that was a fantastic presentation here. So if you look at the triangle, the areas, right? And it is shown very nicely in terms of the population statistically, right? And if I start from the lower, the Shudra, the Dalits and Adivasis, they constitute 22%. And if I see the Brahmins on the top, they are the 3% of the population. So that means you will see the middle also, they have their own percentages. That's how in our constitution also, we have the affirmative policy, and the reservation policy. Accordingly, they have reserved the system there in the education and in the employment opportunities, right? And I came from the Dalit background. So I born as a Dalit, and I grew up in that kind of a environment where people saw me as hey, with my last name, they identify me as a Dalit. And also it is open in the colleges, in the schools, colleges and universities that I went. In the admission board, they will put your caste, SC, scheduled caste. And there itself, it is open. And my identity is open. And even though they don't on the outset show me, but inside everybody knows, hey, what caste everyone belongs to. So that is how it was deep rooted, right? And when I was playing in the schools, we are very hesitant to go to the upper caste homes, right? Even if we go to homes, we won't ask for water when we are playing, because we know we are not going to get it, because they have a system of not getting into their homes, getting into their worship places. So they have severe restrictions in that system, right? We have gone through, and that is in the school, and we grew up. So when I came to US 20 years ago, that was a liberation for me. because I saw myself as a human, and I felt like I got out of this system of caste where I was seen as the bottom layer Dalit, right? And that is a totally a revelation, and the freedom country, that is the first thing that Americano can do. So and nobody see me as Dalit anymore. So that is what I just wanted to show, tell you my story here. Go ahead, Raghav.
Thanks for sharing that, Harsha. One way to understand how caste operates in India is to make the analogy with racism. And I want to distinguish kind of the societal way in which it plays out, which is really how caste is embedded in the fabric of Indian society with the sort of the legal apparatus, right? Legally, the Indian Constitution, and this is a point I'll come to later again, the Indian Constitution does guarantee plenty of rights. It was a major advance in the struggle against the caste system. But if you look at the way society is, even today, right? In its features, the way the caste system plays out is actually pretty reminiscent, has many parallels with the way racism played out in the Jim Crow era, actually, right? So you will see lynchings and overt shows of bigotry are pretty common, right? Lynchings are common. You have segregation, even though it's not in the law, it's in practice. You have segregation, you have untouchability, right? Like even though it's technically illegal, it still happens. You have even in my own experience, right? Even in cities, and if you go to rural India, it's even worse. The residence is clearly segregated by caste, right? People who grow in villages, it's even more clear. There are parts of the villages where which are the so-called the caste oppressors. I'll call them caste oppressors, and then there are other parts of the village which are caste oppressed people. Water is segregated. Access to water, the set of pipes, the set of tanks which you can go to get water, they're segregated. Food is segregated not just in physical terms, like we don't share utensils and so on. That's still part of a society in India today, but also culturally, right? There is this, I guess, one common conception people have of Indian food is vegetarian, right? People, I don't know how many of you believe it, but at least in my workplace, right? When people say Indian food, they typically say vegetarian. Oh, yeah, he's Indian, he must be vegetarian, right? Uh, in reality, I mean, what Harsha talked about, right? The Brahmin caste, that's where most of the vegetarians are, and that's a really small fraction of the Indian population. The majority of the Indian population eats meat, right? And the kind of cuisine is not just meat. I mean, they have their own cuisine and their own innovations in the food domain, which you don't even hear about, right? So it's a major cultural divide in terms of food. And love, right? I mean, majority of Indian marriages in India remain intra-caste, right? Inter-caste marriages are taboo. And you have at least to great levels of violence to stop intercaste marriages even today. Right from like social boycotting to all the way to extreme violence like killings and so on, just to stop marriages between castes. So in all of these senses, it's actually reminiscent. The fabric of Indian society in many ways has echoes of the Jim Crow era of racism. So that's one thing I wanted to communicate. All right. So just like in racism, we don't talk about racism without talking about white supremacy. We're talking about the role of the oppressors. In the same way, for caste, the analogous term is Brahminism, right? You saw the people at the top of the pyramid, they're the so-called the Brahmin caste. And the caste system is probably more appropriately referred to as Brahminism, because it was set up by these caste oppressors. So that's just like we talk about white supremacy. Brahminism is the way to talk about the oppressor caste in India. All right. So now let's talk about that's a background, right? That's a background of the caste system, what it is in the society that these South Asian communities come from. How does it translate to in the US, right? So where people go with them, they take the system. I want to point out that it is undoubtedly true that as you go from, in fact, even from rural India to urban India, there you get a certain level of anonymity, right? The caste system still undoubtedly exists in urban India, but it's not as brutal as it is in rural India. In the same way, when you come from India to the US, there's no doubt that there is everything Harsha talked about is correct, right? There is an element of anonymity and liberatory component to it, but it's also true that South Asians constitute a large part of the American population, right? And if you look at the dynamics among them, caste system is very much alive and kicking. So since it's found, its origin is based in the scriptures, in the Hindu scriptures. It is now found in South Asian communities, even in the United States. So the Equality Labs, they conducted surveys, right? So you would think that caste system is present among the South Asians here, and surveys of the Equality Labs confirm that, right? So you can read this for yourself, but basically you see that 1/4 of all Dalits they surveyed responded said that they'd face physical assault based on their caste. Over 40% of Dalit respondents reported that they were rejected in romantic partnership on the basis of caste. 20% of Dalit respondents report feeling discriminated at the place of business because of their caste, and so on. Right? It's undoubtedly true that many people who are caste oppressed carry the stigma here, and many people who are caste oppressors carry the bigotry when they come here. There is no question, right? Here are some personal anecdotes collected by Equality Labs. I'll let you read them yourself. These are all in America, right? Of what people went through. You can see that they span religious places, they span workplaces, they span interpersonal relationships, so on. Schooling. It plays out in the temples. It plays out in social exclusion. It plays out in families. There happens to be intercaste marriages. It plays out in a lot of ways. You might have also read specifically about the tech sector, right? There has been recent media coverage of how deep caste is in the tech sector also. You might have heard of the Cisco case. That's probably what brought it kind of really out to the media. But following up on that, there's been a variety of coverage in NPR, Washington Post, and other places, right? Talking about the problems of caste in the tech sector. And I want to tell you, right? I mean, what are the ways in which it actually plays out in the workplace? I mean, you can start maybe with hiring, right? We all know that social networks play a big role in hiring, right? It's well known that if you have a resume, somebody from inside the company can recommend you. You're going to have a much better chance of getting a job than if you just blindly submit your resume to the website. Well, the social networks are, at least among South Asians, this phenomenon is well known with race, but it's also true with caste. Among South Asians, most social networks are intra-caste. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that after seeing everything we just talked about. So because of that, at least among the South Asian community, there is a caste bias, right? It may not even be overt, but nonetheless, there is a caste bias in the hiring process itself. The workplace environment can often be unsafe, right? A lot of the examples you saw of bigotry are not even like they're overt examples, overt cases, right? People excluding you socially, eating lunch separately, even just the fact that Indian food is equated with vegetarian is probably a symbol of that, right? It tells you that the mindset in the American workplace is very much dominated by by a very small subset of the caste oppressor folks, right? The Brahminical stereotype. So it works out in workplace environment is not particularly friendly. It borders between cold and hostile for, especially when you have multiple employees of South Asian origin. And, Harsha can testify to that. I mean, one coping mechanism that people have is they just try to pick non-Indian managers, right? That's usually a coping mechanism there.
Yeah.
And they know that they'll get a level of anonymity with non-Indian managers. It happens during promotions. Promotions is again a function of social network, just like hiring. But also there are factors like collegiality and is a person a team player and so on or not, right? And you can imagine that in groups which are dominated by South Asians, this notion of team player, do they get along well? Do they work together well, and so on, is going to have a caste component to it. So that plays out in all these ways, and not surprisingly, right? When you do the survey and see a lot of people who are caste oppressed do complain about facing bigotry in the workplace, and the Cisco case was really brought that out. Harsha, do you want to add something?
Yeah. So I intentionally said it was a liberation, right? And I was waiting for you to complete all these stories. And good, I landed the land of opportunities, right? And suddenly, when we went to a family of our Indian origin, they asked me for my caste, right? We tend to get together with all the Indian communities, and it was a big surprise for me. Because I had that kind of a Dalit background, I never mingled with my Indian community here because I was looking for the diversity, because I was looking for the openness and looking for all the American local I used to go with and everything, right? And with the social media and with the WhatsApp, with the Facebook, and we had a lot of Indian groups, and they started reminding me, hey, you are the guy who came with the affirmation policy. I know how you arrived in US because you had that reservation system. You are the son of Indian government who availed that affirmation, and without merit, you landed there with the government support. That kind of view they portray, and they openly say, even when they come to in India, there is a clear division among Indians. They try to see, hey, they try to even criticize the affirmation policy because they are against it in India and they are against in US because they will see us as a segregated and separate. So they have their own way of identifying us with the last names, with the name and the where we came from, what cities, and it's all because, as Raghav said, we are born in it and we know how to classify and understand what background they came from. So coming back to, so it's no more revelation. I carried the caste with me. It is there. And we are born into it and we are going to die into it because that is the fact. And wherever you go, it's going to be with you. Yeah, take it over, Raghav. So that's what I just wanted to share, my personal experience with all this happening here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up affirmative action because that is also one of the main flashpoints, right? You will see a lot of visceral opposition to affirmative action among the tech employees typically to all kinds of affirmative action, not just caste-based, but in particular caste-based. So that is definitely a big way in which caste plays out. The caste bias is shown here. Yeah, but I guess I wanted to, as we go towards the end of this presentation, I wanted to, it's not just, we are here as part of CWA. You guys are about fighting back. And the story of caste is not just a story of one-sided oppression, right? It's also a story of resistance. And the story of resistance is as old as the caste system itself, right? So there's a long story of resistance that is, that has taken place. And I've put here the picture of Ambedkar, who was, he's popularly known as the father of the Indian Constitution, but he was caste oppressed himself, and he came from that community, and he did a lot more than just writing the Constitution. And writing the Constitution was undoubtedly a huge accomplishment, but he was also an intellectual who fought for the rights of the oppressed until the end of his life. And the legal victories that I was alluding to earlier, right, in terms of the rights that have been won in the Indian Constitution, are in no small part to the struggle of people like Ambedkar, right? So that story of resistance is, we have to be clear about it. In fact, the occurrence of this talk is an example of that. I mean, the work, I mean, I'm coming in talking to you about it, but the work behind the scenes was done by Equality Labs, who did the surveys I showed you about. And they've been working, and people like Harsha have been working consistently on this, right, through their whole lives. And this story of resistance is important to call out. And as part of that, so let's see what are the asks, what are the things we are fighting for in America, right? In the workplace, we want caste to be recognized, caste discrimination to be recognized. If you look at the policies of most companies, they recognize racial discrimination, they recognize gender discrimination, but caste is not on the list, even though all these companies have India offices. Like Microsoft has an India office, Amazon has an India office, Google has an India office, but none of these companies in their HR policies include caste, even in their India offices, right? So, so one thing to fight for is to get that recognition. And basically, we want to include caste as a protected category in all the diversity and inclusion efforts, right? And all the consequences from that. We want to have affirmative action in recruitment. And certainly if there's caste-based harassment and bigotry, then we want that to be recognized. Outside of the workplace, of course, we want the same kind of awareness in society. And it's important to point out that the right wing understands this pretty well, right? So, for example, there was a big fight over the textbooks in the state of California, history textbooks, and how they were presenting Indian history, right? And the right wing really mounted a major fight on that, right? They wanted to control the narrative in California textbooks. You would think, why are these people so worried about the narrative happening in California? When they're like the Indian right wing. But no, they recognize this importance, right? They recognize the importance of the narrative that is stated in America, right? And so from the progressive viewpoint, we have to similarly recognize that. We have to recognize that the narrative in the textbooks, in universities, and in schools and workplaces everywhere needs to recognize caste issues. And even things like DV and sexual violence, especially when you're targeting South Asian communities, you need to recognize caste-based oppression as well. So these are the kind of the things that we are fighting for, right? And in Microsoft, actually, Harsha and I, and along with a few others, are working on the workplace-related issues there.
Yeah, and
so that's one thing I wanted to know.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to point out in differentiating with racism, here you will see denial, because the upper caste people and who born in urban areas in India, they don't recognize the caste discrimination exists because they never went through it, and they deny it. And for them, it's a shame that we are portraying India as negatively by bringing up the caste system. And the upper caste Indians, many of the Indians in US, they treat it as a shame and they deny it. but the pain knows for the people of Dalits and the lower sections of the people. And they say, hey, at one point, we are struggling with this discrimination, and they don't they, uh, they don't realize it exists, and they deny it, and they don't talk about it. But when we talk about it, they say that, hey, these guys are the casteist people, and they brand us. At one time, we are the sufferers, and we are taking the blame, and as if we are protecting the caste system. That is the irony with any other discrimination like racism or something like that. And another thing, in the inside the workplace, like Raghav pointed out, if there is no anti-harassment policy without including the caste in it, how can people go to the HR department complaining about it? Because the federal, state governments in America, they don't have caste in discrimination policy because they never anticipated this many Indians will land in US, right? We understand, but the starting steps should start from the universities and from the corporates. That's where Indians are working. And the path already started. Brandeis University, they announced they included caste as a protected category. And other universities also going in that route. And Raghav and me and people like our empathetic people, we are trying to incorporate caste as a protective category in the HR policies, in the anti-harassment HR policies, because that is the first step. Then you will see where the real things are happening, whether discriminations are happening or not. That is the starting point, and that's where we are emphasizing.
Yeah, and I think the Cisco case is very important too, because I think there's nothing like getting a legal victory, right? It's one thing to rely on companies and their HR policies, but it's even much stronger to rely on law and compel them to pay attention to that. So the Cisco case is I mean, we will try to push the HR of our company. Of course, we'll continue to do that. But we need to recognize that the legal case that's going on right now is really critical. I guess one other thing I wanted to comment on as part of the resistance also, another thing which, since it's related to US, the way the rightward drift of US is, just like in US we had Trump and Trumpism, and that brought out like the most virulent kind of, it appealed to the basest instincts of many Americans, racist and other such instincts of many Americans. In India also you have the Modi government, which is similarly right-wing, right? And with that rightward drift in India as well, you see a lot of casteist feelings get openly displayed in the public. And that includes in America, right? I have a friend who, I mean, he's more plugged into social media than I am. And so he looks at how people express their feelings on social media as an indicator of how deep these feelings of bigotry are. And you see a lot of those things that we talked about getting very openly, at least from the caste oppressor side, right? The Brahminical ideas getting displayed, getting repeated often on social media. I can tell you from my own experience with my family, that happens. People express pretty bigoted ideas in family settings on WhatsApp and so on, right? And for Facebook and Twitter is another place where bigotry really gets to show up. It's not very dissimilar to America, right? With Trump. But I guess that was the material we had. We can now have a discussion Q&A.
Great. Well, thanks. I think that was like really, really sort of illuminating for me. I don't know about you, Tedwood, but I think one of the big things that we do and a lot of the people watching do is sort of organize their workplaces, right? Like you guys have. So I'm interested, what are some of the struggles you've had talking to coworkers or just other people about caste oppression in tech?
We've just started, right? Just to be clear, right? Although the problem in Microsoft is dated, the recent round of activism that Harsha, me, and others are carrying out is relatively recent. So I want to preface what I'm saying with that. So far, the reaction has been kind of mixed. I don't think anyone has been hostile per se among the employees. People have been supportive on one end and indifferent on the other side. The general feeling when you bring up topics like caste in Microsoft, for one thing, it's a very PC environment. It's a politically correct environment. Not many people express their feelings very freely in the workplace, right? They do it on social media. They might do it on mailing lists sometimes and so on. But at least in the day-to-day interaction with your colleagues, those feelings don't come out so easily. But there are flashpoints, right, to at least some of the difficulties. When you talk about things like casteism, like Islamophobia, we generally talk about all these things in the package. You will occasionally get pretty hostile reactions from some of those employees, right? On the hostile end, sometimes you see that. So, for example, right, we were working with the Modi government last year. They passed, these the so-called Citizenship Amendment Act, and there was a big protest which was happening in the Seattle area around it. That affects caste oppressed people, Muslims, and so on, right? It affects many people who are oppressed in India. And I was trying to, I had friends who were organizing an event, and I just advertised the event in Microsoft, right? I just sent out the invite to a bunch of people. And some people complained. They said, "This is political work. Why are you bringing this political stuff? Why are you using work resources to discuss this?" So that was an example of something. In fact, they went ahead and complained to HR, right? HR sent me saying, I understand where you're coming from, but let's try to not have too much of this going around in the workplace emails. So that was a recent example of something. You will see some of that. So the caste activism that we're doing is just in its early days, right? We're still trying to build the movement around it. I'm sure we're going to see some of that as we try to really spread the word, right? Because it doesn't end with talking to HR. We have to kind of change the culture in the company. So we have to talk to a lot of people. And when we talk to a lot of people, we are going to get that reaction. And I also expect that there's going to be a difference, right? It's one thing to oppose overt bigotry, right? People might not complain too much about that. It's another thing to say one of our asks is also, when we say caste is a protected category, we want it to be included in diversity and inclusion efforts, which means it needs to be part of affirmative action programs. That's going to be a difficult conversation with employees, right? In general, affirmative action is a difficult topic. And so, I expect that we will see resistance to that. Yeah. I do know that affirmative action even on caste has led to heated discussions inside Microsoft also in the past, and some shows of bigotry too. So that's something we will see.
Yeah, that's a good question, Wes, because Indians are very workaholic, right? And they focus on work and work time, very dedicated, right? And you'll find that kind of people. And another kind of people, when you bring it caste thing into the conversation, hey, why are you bringing that here? We thought we are in America, right? And they try to see that you are demeaning India by bringing it. They have a feeling that, look, most of the upper caste people and many of the Indians, you will see, India has great civilization. And we have Vedas, we have yoga, and we have every answer to the science that has got. We found airplanes back in Vedas before Wright brothers invented them here. That kind of prideness is there. And when we try to bring the caste system as a victims, because we are the sufferers, they take it very aggressively. You are demeaning our Indian system, caste system, on a world platform. So we get that kind of a feedback from most of the Indians here. So in workspaces, we don't bring these things unless it is compelled. And they openly, in the general discussions, they discuss discuss against affirmation policy, and we counter it. And that is the reason we spend more time with the foreign nationals. We are here, like because we are also Americans now here, and we try to learn the other things. So learn here, then carry what we have there. But we cannot avoid it. So that's how it goes, the workspace environment.
Harsha, I'm so glad you brought up the theme of workaholism or normalizing overwork. For me, at least in my experience, it seems to be a theme among all oppressed groups in professional environments. So I think it's important to be very cognizant of that and to recognize it for what it is. My question is, I'm wondering about what are the biggest barriers you face in moving this project, specifically with employers? Like, what kind of barriers are tech companies themselves providing?
I can go ahead first, Raghav, here.
Yeah.
So the first thing is denial, right? And hey, we have anti-discrimination policy, and we have, what is it called, Raghav? Ancestry. So we have ancestry in our HR policy, and caste system will come under ancestry. So we have covered any discrimination, any that sort, including caste, in our HR policy. So that is our biggest hindrance. And I am trying to research with the academicians and Raghav and other sources. And there was a UN resolution, which Indian government itself presented back in 2007, saying that caste system doesn't fall under ancestry. And it is like apartheid. And you cannot put it in, but the corporates, they don't risk it because they don't have laws from the federal and state governments to impose. So for them, it's a lot of work to collect the data. Who is a Brahmin? Who is what Indian person can fall into what category? And from there, they have to start. And it's a bigger, larger effort for corporates. And they're not willing to take it. And that's what we are pushing it for. And it's a long path to go. Go ahead, Raghav.
Just plus one to everything you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, here we think a lot about how do we pressure these companies to do things. There's been a lot of organizing in tech around, ethical use of technology and stuff like that. We're very, very supportive. We also talk a lot about intersectionality at Code, and oftentimes in the US, that means race, it means class, it means gender. We think obviously caste should be here too. What are some ways in which, you guys think that we can bring this to a bigger audience, that this is a problem, and how do we sort of educate more people about this issue?
Do you want to go first, Harsha?
Yeah, go ahead, Raghav.
I think that I guess you brought up 2 points. One is intersectionality, right? I agree with you. I agree with you that intersectionality is the right frame to view all issues with. It is true, at least in America, there's no question that racism and class kind of are so closely tied together, and militarism and imperialism are so closely tied together that it's almost impossible to separate the three. Right? You have to talk about them in kind of one way. And it is true also similarly that if you look at the Indian society, right, caste and class are deeply mixed, right? Because because caste also correlates with resources, right, and power. It naturally correlates with class as well. So you need an intersectional lens to talk about issues in an Indian context as well. So I do agree with you that caste ought to belong to that intersectional lens when we talk about all these issues. Regarding popularizing issues, I have no magic formula, right? At least speaking for myself, right? I follow the lead of people like Harsha, Equality Labs. These are all the groups. They've been working on this for years, and they have laid out the way in which we ought to go about this. And so I offer my solidarity to them, right? In America, working with companies to change their policies is one of the things that are happening. Clearly, there's a lot of background work, right? Even in the slide deck you saw, there's all these surveys in collecting information about how prevalent caste is in America is a lot of hard work. And that's like your step one of popularizing the issue. But that's big part of it. And then you talk about things like changing policy that comes with that. And I guess these two go hand in hand. So that's how it goes. In
Yeah.
India, obviously, there's a lot more things that are happening, right, in the political system and so on. But in the U.S. context, I guess these are some of the things that are happening.
Yeah. It's multiple dimensions, like education, right? Educating the people here, because India has got a lot of history with the caste system, right? And another point is arranged marriages, right? 90% of the marriages are in India are arranged. When it is arranged, you can confidently say that only the marriages happen within caste,
Okay.
right? And coming to US, and when we all became US citizens, and I'm curious to see how it is gonna happen for the next generation. And that is the one optimistic, because we leave our background there and we get married, and our kids get married to different races, and that is one of the optimism I see as a dissemination.
I wanted to add that, I mean, talking both about intersectionality and making the cause more well known, opportunities for solidarity, right? Like, I think that even this conversation, right, we're having with CWA is a good example of both. It's a good example of both intersectionality as well as getting the word out, right? So, we talked about racism in the presentation. So between anti-racist organizing and anti-caste organizing, there's very natural opportunities for solidarity. Between anti-sexist organizing and anti-caste organizing, there's very natural opportunities for solidarity. With anti-class, anti-capitalist organizing and anti-caste organizing, there's very natural opportunities for solidarity, right? So these are all ways in which we could certainly both get the word out as well as build the intersectional kind of apparatus.
Yep. And like Tedwood said, right, workaholism, right? And you will see Indians nowadays, they're coming with protests, whatever is happening to India, and democratic, because they have more freedom to protest against any atrocities that has happened in India. So that means it is happening, and we are very optimistic about it. And they are presenting our problems in the world of platforms. Yeah. And that is the strength we are seeing here. Because until then, it did not happen for the last, before 30 years or so, because that's when from India, educated people started pouring across the world. And now we have a world platform to look upon to present to our issues and mobilize help.
Even the right-wing regimes, even if you look at Trump and Modi, right? The fight against Trump, the fight against Modi, there's a lot of parallels between them, right? There is no way you can win the fight against Trumpism, even though Trump is elected, has gone, Trumpism is still there. There's no way you can fight against Trumpism without confronting racism. There's no way you can fight against Modi without confronting caste. And if you see these fights as, there's a right wing in the rise in the world, and Trump and Modi, there's a lot of similarities between them. It's natural to build these bridges, right? And have like a unified movement.
Like you all said, the other side of the story is the resistance within the struggle. So I'm actually very interested in some of, maybe you can give some examples, but can you touch on how discrimination of caste oppressed people plays out in real ways in workplaces specifically?
Here in US?
Yes, here in the US.
Raghav, you wanna take it? Start. Because
I
I
guess
am in the
it starts.
field. So go ahead.
I can give you several examples, right? Starting with hiring. Let's talk about the institutional apparatus, and maybe you can look at specific examples. The institutional apparatus, hiring. We all know that hiring social network is a big part of it. And at least among the South Asian employees, right? If you look at their social network, those are mostly intra-caste, right? And so it shouldn't surprise you that hiring tends to stay among the South Asian social networks, at least tends to stay within caste. So there is a caste bias operating there. In the workplace environment, after post hiring, in the workplace environment, the variety of things can happen, right? Um, uh, like, for example, social exclusions. Even like I guess I gave this example of vegetarian food, right? The stereotype. I don't know if Wes and Tedwood, what do you guys do? You have this image of Indian food being equated with vegetarian food? Do you?
I've heard that expressed quite a bit,
Quite a
actually.
bit. Yeah. So that's a Brahminical stereotype, right? That you're talking about a really small sector of the Indian population right there, right? And that tells you a lot, right? It tells you a lot both about the kind of people you're meeting, as well as the implications for the workplace environment, right? Because social networks tend to be intra-caste, the workplace environment can easily be uncomfortable or caste exclusionary, right? Let's put it that way. Maybe that's a better word. Caste exclusionary, right? If a caste oppressed person does manage to make it to the workplace, how well will they get along with all of their coworkers, especially the South Asian coworkers? Unclear, right? And that has implications not just on their day-to-day lives. I can tell you, right? In Microsoft, I have seen, especially on the topic of affirmative action reservations, a lot of caste bigotry being expressed, and overt, right? People bear in mind, this is a politically correct environment, right? People don't use racist language or sexist language so easily, right? They're always worrying about what they say. But on mailing lists, when affirmative action was discussed, especially affirmative action in India, they felt perfectly comfortable. They didn't even see anything wrong with expressing bigotry on the mailing list. It was really to affirmative action policies, caste-based affirmative action policies in India. Now, imagine the kind of a workplace environment that caste oppressed people will face with colleagues like that, right? That's not going to be very pleasant. And the Cisco case was a good example. There was a case of a manager who recognized that his direct report, because they went to college together, he knew his caste location, and he showed the caste bias in variety of ways, right? He excluded him from socially in variety of ways. So that is a good example, concrete example of how it played out in the workplace. But that has implications on even things like promotions, right? Promotions are social. Everyone understands that it's not just your technical skill or how good you are, right? How good you are is a factor. I don't want to deny that. But in addition to that, there's a lot of non-technical or non-work related factors which go into an evaluation. Like how well do you get along with your colleagues? Are you collegial? Are you a team player? And so on, right? Caste is a dimension that, especially in groups which have a lot of South Asians, right? Caste is a dimension that would play out in this, right? Even things like for example, right, celebration of festivals, right? Those tend to be very casteist in nature, right? The way in which people celebrate festivals is also very differentiated by caste. So you can imagine, like, okay, some Indian employees want to get together and celebrate a festival. What is the caste dynamics going to be in that setup? And what are its implications going to be on your interpretation of being a team player or being collegiate? And what are its implications going to be on your promotion, right? These are all
You bring it up
undoubtedly going to happen.
You're bringing up a great point. So there's a question from the audience that like touches on this too. So in tech companies, obviously it's popular to have things like yoga and Diwali. Are those casteist as well?
Yoga tends to be, absolutely, right? And Diwali tends to be too. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a long
Absolutely.
topic on that one too, right? In India, Dravidians and Aryans were there, and celebrating Diwali, and there are certain historic godly, because the demons are from South India, and the gods are from the North India. So the majority of the North, the desegregation is they treated the South Indian Dravidian gods as demons. So that's why they celebrate when they kill the gods of South India. So that was the concept. And when we question it, that comes a friction there. So like every Diwali or any Dasara, and any cultural like celebrations we do, there is a long history of casteism.
Yeah.
Deeply integrated into it, right? So that is one thing. And like Raghav was saying, to address Wes's question, Cisco case is the right thing. So for the caste system, and the merit is the key thing. And the upper caste people, and they think merit is everything. And our education system also in India, the ranking, who gets top in the entrance test, who gets top in the class, who gets top in graduation, that is all they care. That is the supremacy of education. But that is not we learned in US. Here, it is very practical education. And so when a manager of India trying to evaluate another, is a team members, he has a clear-cut framework in his mind, merit. Who gets more marks, who gets more certifications, and they treat that employee is talented.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't care much about the real operational efficiencies.
Absolutely.
So that is one thing.
That the merit piece really just mirrors every form of discrimination I've ever heard of or experienced myself in the workplace. And it brings to mind that, you know, there are so many similarities in the way these institutional oppressions within caste discrimination play out. You know, there's so many commonalities with other forms of oppression. But, you know, it's because it's so endemic to, you know, Southeast Asian culture or South Asian culture, it's almost invisible to the rest of us. And I think we have so much to gain from being enriched by, you know, discussions like this, and trying to work in solidarity with each other. So I wanted to thank you for your insight on all of that.
Yeah, I just think one other thing that would be beneficial is, especially following on and with the Wilkerson's book, right? There's a lot of similarities between the way caste plays out and the way racism plays out, right? And I think there's things to learn there.
Well, thanks so much, guys. This was, you know, I can't echo, you know, what Tedwood said more. I think this is a serious issue that we want to bring, you know, as much attention to as possible, especially, you know, in this moment where there's so much organizing around social justice and racial justice issues in this country. So, you know, thank you, Harsha. Thank you, Raghav, for coming to speak with us. Do you guys have any like last thoughts or anything, or is there anywhere people should go if they're trying to learn more about this or get involved?
And actually, thank you, Wes, and everyone here, and for giving us this opportunity. And because we found a platform to present our situation here, and we have a goal, we have a vision to go there, and this is all coming together, and you are the enablers.
Yeah, in terms of resources, I guess a great starting point is Equality Labs, right? Go to the Equality Labs website. That's a great starting point to understand this.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for you too for tuning in on the live stream. Again, this is Code Talk, a monthly series hosted by CODE-CWA, where workers and organizers in the tech industry study and explore the historical, economic, and political context in which we struggle. The Campaign to Organize Digital Employees, CODE-CWA, is an initiative by the Communication Workers of America, CWA, to support workers' organizing efforts in the technology, game, and digital media industries. Learn more about CODE-CWA and contact an organizer at code-cwa.org. Solidarity forever.